Father, are you ready? Okay. So, yes, welcome to the History Center. Thank you all for coming. My name is Leslie Stranahan. I'm one of the docents here on weekends. Today we have the first of the Sunday lecture series to accompany the exhibit Ghost Towns of Compano Bay. These talks will continue every other week in September, so please come join us. Now we're pleased to present David Krosky, the regional archaeologist with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. He came from Pennsylvania more than 5 years ago and has delved into regional history and archaeology ever since. Please join me in welcoming Dave. You're welcome.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And today I'm going to talk about the oldest of the ghost towns of Compano Bay, and that is the town of Compano. So first, I'll give a quick background and kind of a setting. The site of Compano is depicted by the star here that is on the west bank of Compano Bay, near Mission Bay. And this area had been occupied for a very long time, well before Europeans arrived here. In fact, people have been here for well over 11,000 years, going back to the last ice age. And the indigenous group that was here whenever Europeans came were the Compano, and more specifically a Compano group called the Compano. And it's important to point out that this is a really harsh environment in this area, given with the humidity and mosquitoes and all. But these people were perfectly adapted for the environment. In fact, Europeans said that their descriptions of them said that these were very healthy-looking people. They were tall, and obviously, obviously were very good at getting resources, from the bay, for example. And they were known for making dugout canoes. And in fact, Compano is actually that's a Spanish term, and it's a reference to the boats, to the canoes that the Spanish saw on the beach along the coast. So that's where that name comes from. And the first European, more than likely to see some of the local bays, it was a guy named Pineda. He was a Spaniard, and in 1519 he mapped pretty much the entire Gulf Coast. And then about a decade later, Cabeza de Vaca was one of the more important Europeans that first came into this area, and he was part of an ill-fated expedition, and he ended up being marooned on Galveston Island with a couple other folks, and they actually met the Compano, and they lived amongst some other Native American groups on their way to Mexico, which ended up taking years, and then he ended up going back to Spain. But one of the great things about Cabeza de Vaca is that he wrote things down. He wrote down his experiences being over here. So then we had a record, and we today have a record that we could look up of what people were like and what conditions were like back then. So he was almost kind of like an early anthropologist. And then after that, even though Spain was considering this part of their empire, they more or less kind of ignored this area for about 150 years. And finally, the French expedition, the French La Salle expedition, set up a small settlement on Garcias Creek, which was actually by accident. They were from Mississippi, but they ended up on Garcias Creek, set up a small settlement, and it actually fairly quickly failed. But that was enough for the Spanish to want to really come into the area and establish control over it. And that's where the missions come in. That's where the missions start to be established. The La Bahia mission, which started on Garcias Creek, pretty much right on top of La Salle's settlement. And over the years, it actually ended up in Goliad. Also, the missions in San Antonio, and later on, a mission in Refugio. And this was considered a neat port and a relatively safe port. And it's important to remember, I'm actually going to go back here. See, the channel at Port Aransas that goes towards Corpus Christi, you have to remember, that's man-made. That's not natural. Naturally, the way to get inland would have been to go north and go up through Aransas Bay. And since the missions were set up inland, this actually made the most sense for a port. And so this is where they came in to get their to supply the missions. And initially, it basically, there wasn't a lot to it. And this consisted of a customs house, a warehouse, and a freshwater tank. So then in 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain. And a lot like the Spanish before them, Mexico really wanted to try to establish control of the area. Because again, this was kind of a harsh place to live, and so they really sort of needed to incentivize people to come and settle. And that's what they wanted people to do. They wanted people to come and settle in the area to establish that control. Partially, or a big part of it was to repel encroachment from the pesky Anglo-Americans who were starting to pour into what is now Texas at the time, and we refer to them as the Texans. So it was partially to repel their encroachment, but they didn't necessarily want to just bring in anybody. They wanted to bring in people who maybe they thought would be good for the Mexican cause. Particularly, they wanted people that were Catholic because just like Spain was a Catholic a Catholic country, Mexico was also Catholic. So their preference was to have Catholic people, and so this is where empresarios came in, and the idea of an empresario or an empresario contract is that Mexico was offering big land grants to men that were willing to bring in immigrants, lots of families into the area to settle. So that was kind of the idea. And so meanwhile, in Ireland, the Irish were facing famine. People think of the potato famine. That was a little bit later than this, but they had been having famines for a while. So they were facing famine, and then religious and political persecution, and a lot of them were ready to leave. And like Mexicans, the Irish were Catholic, and so it turned out that they were a pretty good fit for people to come and settle Texas, the Mexican Texas. And by the way, you're going to see that I make a lot of references to Irish people, and that is because the Irish played a really big role in Compano and in early settlement. And on the other hand, Compano was important to the Irish and to Irish settlement into Texas. So you'll see that I bring up the Irish a lot. So the most important impresario for this area was James Power. He was born around 1788 in Ireland, and he immigrated to New Orleans in 1809, and he made his living as a merchant. And he and his friend James Hewitson, who also happened to be Irish, they knew Stephen F. Austin, who I'm sure you've heard of, and he was the first and probably one of the most, if not the most important impresario in Texas. And Austin told them about these impresario contracts. And so then in 1828, James Power and James Hewitson became impresarios. And their area can be seen here. This area here, and it contained Compano and the old Spanish mission of Refugio. And there's a couple other land grants that were at least partially relevant to Compano, and that would be the De Leon grant to the north, and the Beale and Grant land grant. And also, it just so happened that the two other Irish fellows, named McMullen and McGloin, they also got a land grant that just so happened to be just west of the Power and Hewitson grant. And so from 1828 to 1836, Compano served as a major port of entry. And the impresarios, they traveled far and wide to Ireland, to New York, to Philadelphia to recruit people to come settle. And so, as a result, hundreds of families came into Texas through Compano. if they were lucky enough to make it. Because there were cholera outbreaks even in the boats as the ships on their way here. Hundreds of people died from cholera. Some of the people were buried at sea, or they were buried at Compano. And they also had to worry about shipwrecks, because making your way through this area, there are lots of oyster reefs and lots of the water can be really shallow, so lots of shipwrecks. And an example of that was the Wildcat, which was carrying immigrants, and it actually wrecked on an oyster reef in Compano Bay. And what's cool is it's still there. Archaeologists have discovered it, so that is a shipwreck, and some people died on that shipwreck. But yeah, it's still there. So some notable settlers that came through Compano were John Lynn, and also the Fagan family, the O'Brien family, the O'Connor family, and the Lambert families. So some of the resulting early colonies, we had Refugio, which was built up around the old mission of Refugio, and that was in the Power and Hewitson land grant, and the McMullen and McGloin land grant. Immigrants established San Patricio, which of course is named after St. Patrick. And some of these early colonies didn't make it. The Beal and Grant colony, they established a settlement called Dolores. This is out near present day, out near Del Rio. And that settlement actually failed, and most of the settlers died, unfortunately. John Lynn ended up establishing Linville, which is near Port Lavaca. That also didn't make it. That town was destroyed by the Comanche raid in 1840. And Victoria, that was also established right around the same time. And I'm not sure how many of the people that ended up in Victoria came through Compano, but there's a good chance that some of them came through Compano. And then also there were other families that settled the countryside, including the Fagan family, who settled on the San Antonio River, kind of going out towards present day Fannin. And then the O'Connors, specifically Thomas O'Connor, was a very important major early rancher in the area. Now, Compano itself, it actually wasn't really developed very much. It was still pretty small. It still only consisted of a couple structures, and it was mostly just used as a port to support these early colonies. And then after not too long, the Texas Revolution happened, and Compano played a really big role in the Texas Revolution, and it was actually being used by both the Mexicans and the Texians, kind of back and forth. First it was Mexico whenever General Cos brought in troops, and then Sam Houston had it come under the control of the Texians, and then Mexico got control of it again when General Urrea brought in troops, and it basically stayed in Mexican control up until the end of the war. The Battle of San Jacinto, which effectively ended the war, the Texians finally got control back. But what was interesting is that Mexico was still bringing in ships to support the Mexican soldiers. And so a group of Texas Rangers led by Isaac Burton, they kind of patrolled the area, and they spotted a Mexican ship near Compano. And so what they did, kind of make a long story short, they basically tricked the Mexican ship into thinking that they needed rescue, that maybe they were like Mexicans that needed to be rescued. So they were able to capture the Mexican ship, and then they in turn used that ship to be a decoy and capture two other ships. And so then they became known as the famous horse boats. So another interesting thing about the Texas Revolution is that while Mexico, they felt like the Irish would be good people to bring in because they would be loyal to Mexico. Well, they were wrong. It turned out that the Irish settlers, at least most of them, ended up siding with the Texians, and many of them played a very prominent role in the Texas Revolution and fought and died for the Texas cause. And the town this actual settlement of Compano didn't start until 1840. The first house was built by a surveyor named Joseph Plummer, and soon after, at least 10 homes were built. It actually could have been, I've read that it could have been perhaps dozens, potentially housing like even as many as 200 people. It also constructed were a school, a post office, 2 stores, a warehouse, a lumber shed, 3 wharves, several cisterns, and a cemetery. And the primary material used to build the structures was shell creek, which was common for early settlements in this area. It's not unique to Texas, but it was very common in some of these early settlements. In Shell Creek, it's basically a way to utilize the very abundant shell that would have been right next to Compano in very large quantities, and they utilized crushed shell plus lime, which the lime could have been, that may have been from the actual shells themselves, maybe from burning them, and then sand. I can't remember the exact formula for the Shell Creek, but that was but they utilized the local resources, and these were and the roofs were made from slate that was imported either from Ireland or the United States. Prominent families that lived in Compano were the Plumbers, the Nortons, the Lamberts, the Smiths, the Adams, and the Simpsons, and then eventually the James Power himself. And an interesting story is that Joseph Plummer, being the first person to build a house in this area, he must have picked the best spot because at some point James Power himself wanted to move into Compano, and he kicked Plummer out, and that's why Plummer, his house, and all the way up there, he had to build a new house, and kind of so that James Power could build a house where he wanted. And so to kind of add salt to the wound, I guess he utilized he actually incorporated Plummer's house into his big kind of grand house. But I guess Plummer ended up getting the last laugh because James Power actually died before he was able to move into it. But so anyway, so this ended up being really a thriving port through the 1860s, and local industries really relied on Compano as a port, in particular the cattle industry, especially hides and tallow, and also cotton and salt, and they were sending things out to places like New Orleans, and with incoming supplies going as far west in Texas as Uvalde. And then, of course, during this time, this is whenever Texas was annexed into the United States, Compano played a big role once again in war. This time in the Civil War, and one of the strategies of the Union was to blockade southern ports, basically to kind of snuff out these ports and to disrupt supply chains. But Compano was kind of tucked back in and was relatively hidden. So they were able to kind of sneakily, like load and unload ships and continue to trade. And we call those the blockade runners. And in particular, they were mostly exporting cotton and salt to Mexico in exchange for Mexican silver to fund the war. Didn't last too long. The Union became wise to it eventually and stopped. Not too long after that, Compano began to go into decline. One of the reasons for this was there was unreliable drinking water, and why they didn't drill for water, drill wells, don't know. But another reason is because railroads were really starting to rise in importance, and around this time, and Compano did not get a railroad connection. I'm sure it was advocated for, but it never happened. And probably the biggest reason was the rise of some of the other ports in the area, in particular Rockport. So Rockport was one of the ones that did get a railroad connection, and so the location of Compano was no longer really a strength; it was more of a weakness. Like a place like Rockport just kind of made more sense at the it was abandoned. And probably, at least in my opinion, as an archaeologist, probably the coolest thing about Compano is that the ruins are still there. And here's an image here with some of the Shell Creek ruins. And one of the problems is that it is actively eroding, these ruins are actively eroding into the bay, so we're losing them. And so in 2005, a team of archaeologists went out there and documented as much of the town, as much of the ruins as they could. And so they mapped out the structures, and they found graves and also artifacts, like the types of artifacts that you would expect for a town like this. And so here's an example of one of the maps. This is believed to be the Lambert family complex, and they had a store that was 2 stories. They had a 2-story building, and several homes. And again, this is it's being and we're losing it, unfortunately. So, but luckily archaeologists were able to document as much as they could. Here's another example of a cistern and the map that archaeologists made. And then to the right here, that is the gravestone of Joseph Plummer, who again was built the first house in Compano. And so, kind of to wrap up, Compano played a very big role in early Texas history. It started by supporting the early Spanish missions and supplying them with what they needed. And in general, it played a really big role in developing the area, bringing in settlers for some of these very early colonies. It also played a very important role in both the Texas Revolution and in the Civil War. And the ruins themselves are really kind of a part of Compano's legacy, just the fact that they're there, and the fact that we were able to record everything, and now we have that information more or less in perpetuity, because so even though eventually we're going to lose all the ruins, we have it all documented. So that's really important to our understanding of early settlement in the area. And it's a great example of Shell Creek, of early Shell Creek construction. It's a really neat example of that. And that's still reflected to the fact. You can, right outside here, you can see a very good example of Shell Creek. And at Goose Island State Park, right down the road, the rec hall is actually made out of Shell Creek. And that was done very intentionally. Whenever the Civilian Conservation Corps built Goose Island State Park back in the 30s, that's what they wanted. They wanted to give the structures kind of like a local flavor, sort of like a local throwback. So that's what they did. Unfortunately, the rec hall was painted a while ago for whatever reason, but it is constructed out of Shell Creek. And so, and then also the legacy of the Irish people in Texas. I think I read that there are over 500,000 people in Texas that are of Irish ancestry, and at least some of them can trace their roots all the way back to Compano. So certainly, at least the people that are from the area. And so, and then here's an image of St. Patrick's Day celebration in Corpus Christi, and it celebrates this Irish culture and Irish heritage. And so, next time you are, so I guess to conclude, the next time you are at a St. Patrick's Day event, then you could show off your smarts and you could tell them all about the old town of Compano. So, all right, and so that's it for me. Does anybody have any questions?
Where is Compano's location relative to the current village of Bayside?
Relative to the current, I'm sorry?
Village of Bayside.
Relative to the current village of Bayside.
If you know where Mission Bay is, you know where it was.
Port Bay's over there, it's close to Port Bay. Bayside's close to Port Bay.
It's only a red.
Yeah,
So how much distance between the two?
How much distance?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. Does anybody have a
Probably about 6 miles maybe, or
6 mile?
something like that. You cross, it's one side of Mission Bay to the other, and it's right on if you know where Compano Reef is, that's where the town of Compano is just north of Compano Reef. And it runs almost way across Compano Bay.
Yes,
In 2005, when they did the excavation, and you said they found the cemetery, the burial sites, did they do any kind of, to figure out if it was men, women, children in those grave sites?
to my knowledge, and Pam can correct me if I'm wrong on this, they didn't excavate any of the.
Oh, okay, so they didn't do any
So,
of
yeah,
that.
they just documented the cemetery itself from above ground. Yes,
You showed some piers on your sketch there. I assume those were for offloading the ships.
I'm sorry?
You showed some piers on your sketch off of the shoreline. I assume that was for offloading the ships.
Yes, the wharfs. Those were. You mean these, right?
Yes.
Yep. Yes, those were, there were three of them, yes, those were wharves for loading and unloading ships. Although, I think for a lot of the time, I'm not sure what happened to those, but, at one point, it was documented that what they were doing was, they were actually, having to take stuff out, they were floating like barrels of tallow and stuff like that out to the ships. So, but at least at one point, they had doors, and presumably they were being used.
So the,
So I'm assuming it was all part of, attached with Indianola, there's this whole Mexican cart, before the railroads came in. There was a Mexican cart trail that went from Compano to Uvalde. Can you touch on that, or?
Well, certainly,
Commerce.
certainly earlier on, it was primarily a way to, it was connected to Goliad, well, to Refuria, then on to Goliad, then on to San Antonio.
Hey, Dave, that's a real interesting point, because if you were in Mexico sending supplies, the closest point by water to the missions was right there.
Exactly.
From then on, it was ox cart. So they came here mainly because that's the closest they get by water. And it's a whole lot easier to carry things on water than it is on an ox cart.
Right. Now, eventually, the exact paths that were taken to further inland and or to say like Indianola, I'm not really sure, to be totally honest, but.
Dave, there's one more thing about that. I was a tag-along on that group in '05, and at the bottom of every one of those windows was a pile of glass, broken glass. So they had glass windows in those, and probably because of mosquitoes.
That's interesting, I actually didn't know that.
I didn't either. I mean, no, I think anybody else did that we went over there and saw it.
Why hasn't anybody else gone out there to Compano to document?
Well, it's actually on private property, and I think at this point, since it has been documented, I think, on one hand, it may be thought that like, well, we've done kind of what we could, and, if nature takes it, then that's what happens. I am not aware of any efforts to go out there and do any more archaeology or anything like that. But, part of that, again, is partially maybe because it's on private property, and, permission would obviously be needed to do anything out there. But I don't know, I don't know if there are any efforts to do any more archaeology out there or not. My understanding is there's not. Pam's shaking her head no, so that's our.
Well, we couldn't get permission to go back.
And those owners are pretty picky.
I could imagine, yeah. I could
But
imagine.
at least two rows have gone off in the bay of the housing. So we're not sure exactly how many, but that's part of that. But that one dock way down at the end still looks like it's still there.
It's funny that you said Mexican land grants, because I've always heard it as Spanish land grants that were awarded to like the O'Connors and the King Ranch and all of that.
Well, There certainly were Spanish land grants, certainly more in the southern and western part of the state, for sure. Around here, see, you have to remember that like whenever that started happening, it wasn't too long before Mexico got their independence. So and actually one of the grants, Stephen F. Austin, his father Moses Austin, he actually got, see, because Spain was trying to do something like they were actually starting to do this in this area too. And in central Texas, they did grant Moses Austin a land grant, but once Mexico became independent, it basically voided it. But the Mexican government and Moses Austin ended up dying, but Stephen F. Austin basically got that grant, and so that was actually kind of the first one. So hopefully that helps. Does that kind of answer your question? Yes.
The proximity of that shipwreck is, do you know exactly where or close to where that shipwreck was?
We do. As it happens, that it is considered an archaeological site, so we tend to not advertise where shipwrecks are and where archaeological sites are. But it is in Compano Bay, and I don't know how much the reefs have changed since then. But and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure where it is myself, because sometimes where archaeologists have their the official kind of point, those aren't always necessarily accurate, because it may have been recorded like a long time ago, for example. So to be honest, I'm not even terribly sure exactly.
Have you been on it?
Have I been on?
Yeah, did you go down and see the ship?
No, I did not. I have not seen the shipwreck myself.
Why?
I would love to. That's one of the things that I would love to do. I would love to do underwater archaeology one day. For the most part, I'm a terrestrial. So one of these days, perhaps I will.
You would think that there would even be more archaeological finds if they had these huge schooners and what are they called, Ballantines, and 250, 500 ton ships coming in, that there would be, might all be silted in now.
Yeah.
But you would think as much activity as there would be more out there.
There.
Pieces of it maybe, but.
Right, and there are quite a few shipwrecks. There are lots of archaeological remains that have been found, and as it happens, so, some of our archaeological laws are based on people taking stuff from shipwrecks. That's actually how some of our state laws. That's what initially prompted some of them. And so yes, there are lots of remains out there, but I do have to say, as an archaeologist, we do encourage people to ask an archaeologist to get your information from us rather than actually go out and look for treasure, as it were, because really for us, for archaeologists, the value is it's not so much in the materials themselves, but it's in the information we get from them. And so when people take stuff like that, and that's on same thing on land, with arrowheads and spear points and things like that. Whenever they get taken, we lose information, and so much like the ruins can tell us a lot about early Compano. Obviously, you can't go and loot the big Shell Creek ruins out of Compano, but it's kind of the same concept. Whenever things are missing, then we're not able to tell that story to other people. So just as kind of a quick plug for archaeological stewardship, yes, there is certainly a lot of stuff out there, but hopefully ideally it stays intact. Yes.
When we did the excavation, or really the recording on Compano with A&M University, the Texas Historic Commission came in and did a survey of the bay, trying to see if they could determine where the piers were or if there were other shipwrecks out there. and they did not locate anything, and that was in 2005.
Okay.
Okay, and, but coming up sometime this fall, I believe Amy Borgens is gonna be working in the Matagorda area again on, a ship that might have been Jean Ari's ship. And Ari had a settlement there, he was a Frenchman who had a settlement there, about the same time as Lafitte, the Lafitte's.
Oh.
So that could be making news sometime this fall.
Very interesting. Good to know. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all again very much for being here. Really appreciate it, and you have a good rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.